Hey out there, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. Hope you're having a great day, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. I am joined by Gerald Murphy of SimilarWeb, and today we're talking about building your SERP feature strategy. The competition for prime real estate on Google search results page is fierce. And the only step to understanding how to rank is understanding the current trends in your industry. So not every industry is optimizing for the same SERP feature. A local business path to optimization looks very different than an e-com only powerhouse. So Gerald's going to share some tips that you can use for a better SEO strategy for your industry. But before we get too deep into this, my name's Heather Campbell, and I'll be your moderator today. Gerald, thanks for being with us. Before we get into some general housekeeping, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much, Heather, and all of the Search Engine Journal team for having me on board today. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you. My name is Gerald Murphy, and I've actually worked in SEO for over 10 years. And remarkably, I'm one of the odd ones that got into it through university. I studied information retrieval. So I studied how people search in CD-ROMs, but actually back in the day to librarianship, searching for books and so on. And that's where I really fell in love with search accidentally. At that time, I didn't know SEO existed as an industry. So then I started reading up on how does digital excel our search behaviors. And that's exactly what I'm hoping to start sharing little snippets with you guys today in terms of SERP features.
Awesome. All right, well, we're excited. So I'm just going to take a quick minute and then we're going to give this over to Gerald. So for those of you who have webinared with us before, you will notice the platform is different. If you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to let us know. There are separate tabs for questions and chat, so take a minute to get familiar with those. They're in the top right of your screen. And chat is where you'll talk amongst yourselves and with us. And the Q&A is for questions. As you know, we'll answer many of the questions, as many of as we can at the end of the presentation. Something new to this platform is that there's also a closed captioning option. So you just click the little CC up in that top right corner. All right, let's see. We will do our best to link to any resources or tools in the chat, but if we miss one, just ask. Resources will also be included in your recap email that you'll get later today. And then after the webinar, stick around for a short survey. It doesn't take more than 3 minutes, and this information really helps us gauge what works and how we can make SEJ webinars more useful for you. And lastly, this is the question that we get the most. You will absolutely 100% receive this recording. So watch your inbox for that. It should arrive later today. And that's enough for me. So let's get to it. Gerald, it's all yours. I'll be back at the
Thank,
Q&A.
thank you very much indeed, Heather. And guys, keep your questions coming in as and when we start to encounter them. So let's get straight in. What we're going to cover today is the key search engine behaviors that we exhibit online. We're really complex. We're human beings. We have very different behaviors depending on the culture we're brought up in, our thought processes, and so on. What we're going to do today is apply that to search engines itself. We're going to look at a few things that impact a search, and then we're going to start looking at some SERP feature trends across the United States and the UK. Of course, as you're going to see later on, the SimilarWeb platform can help you with other markets. Then we're going to dive deeply into the 5 SERP features that you should be optimizing today based on what is most popular and what's been growing. And then we're going to finish on a few top tips that you can do to actually optimize your SERP feature presence. So let's get straight in. Search is incredibly complex, and we often think about search as just literally going on to a search engine, but actually we search in our everyday lives. We maybe, for example, be asking a friend for a recommendation of a babysitter. That is actually search. We may even go in, for example, to a library and start to ask the librarian, what types of books do you recommend relating to a particular category or subcategory? That is a search. Digital has excelled search, and more crucially, it's actually brought it into words. And that's exactly what this is all around. And what I want to do before I start deep diving into how search engines actually construct SERP pages, I want to start actually breaking down into why SERPs exist in the first instance. And the reason for it is because humans have really complex behaviors. So one of the most common SERP features that we have is a thing called thrashing. And basically what that means is you and I go and do a search using a keyword, we see the results, and then we end up reformulating that query. And that can happen for many reasons. We could be standing in a coffee queue, the coffee arrives, we're in the middle of starting a search. Doesn't mean it was a bad search, it just means we have to close the search and either reformulate it. On the flip side, it could be that we've started to search for a topic and it's really broad, and we actually have thought of an actual better keyword that will give us potentially better results. That type of behavior is called thrashing. It's very keyword centric. We also have this thing called pogo sticking, and sticking is actually search at its best because it's a conversation. It's when we have a topic, we have a range of different keywords, we're looking at a range of different results, and actually what we're now doing is looking at a range of actually different content types. And that actually helps us to reformulate a query. So we may, for example, start off with things like travel as a keyword. Later on, we're going to things like travel to Europe. And then actually later on, we're actually looking at some European countries. That's actually helping us to evolve that whole search experience. And that is at its best. But pogo sticking doesn't just apply to search. This is also why, for example, when you look on e-commerce websites or larger websites, they have filters where you can actually go and look for things like sneakers and running shoes and filter them by color, by size, and so on. That's also pogo sticking on the same website. Pogo sticking also occurs in search. Pearl growth is usually when we're fairly new to a topic, and what we're really trying to establish is what other keywords can I actually say relating to this topic? So maybe we'll start off with one document, for example, a Wikipedia article. We start to learn a little bit more about that particular topic. And as a result, we start to formulate and gather other types of keywords relating to that to make us better searches. This is what we call parallel growing in search. Then we have expand. So it's literally when we start doing a query, we see results, and sometimes we see results that aren't really fit for purpose, if you like, where we're actually starting to think of, actually, I want more results that are more towards, for instance, videos or news articles. And what this is going to do is actually help us to reformulate our search and use of the filters to get much better results relating to what our information needs are. Then we have narrow. Sometimes we cast the net out so wide, we don't really know actually where to look within those results. Maybe it's too broad. Maybe, for example, in e-commerce, we're looking for things like laptops. Is it a laptop for work? Is it for personal use? And actually, what we need to do is we need to rein ourselves in and become a little bit more specific. And that's what we call narrow types of search queries. And finally, every single search needs to end. It can be good or bad. We literally sometimes just go to the search engine, we see our results, and we've been satisfied. We've got all the information we're looking for. On the flip side of that, we may be at a bus stop. We're waiting for the taxi to arrive, whatever the case may be. We have to end our search at some point, and we all have to end our search. And therefore, quit is an actual type of search behavior overall across all industries. So before we jump into SERP features, what I want to now do is have a look at some of the key things that influence a search itself. So income, education, and health, for the most part, are a way in which we engage with technology, not how we use it. So in terms of search, income, education, and health have absolutely no impact on how we use a search engine. And actually, one of the things that search engines do incredibly well is simplification. Simplification of just showing a search bar and literally a search button. That's it. All of the search engines do this for this core reason. And the core reason is for you to be able to use the actual interface. If you can use it, you can become a returning customer. And that's exactly what search engines want you to become. Location has an impact on the type of results you get. So, for example, if you do a search for hairdressers as a keyword, it's likely to actually show you hairdressers where you're physically located if you've granted those permissions as part of your settings. But it actually has no impact on where we're from in terms of how we use a search engine, just the types of keywords. One obvious example is language. If, for example, we can speak multiple languages, we're therefore more likely to actually type and search for information in multiple languages. Gender, for the most part, has no impact on a search. However, males tend to spend more time examining the SERP, the search engine results page, and they tend to overall use a lot more filters compared to females. Whereas females actually tend to have a lot more browser tabs open, so they tend to do deep inspection of the actual results themselves versus male behaviors. And finally, in terms of age, overall, it has no impact on a search. However, older people i.e. those over the age of 60, which makes sense. The internet, for example, didn't exist then. They spent more time on the SERP as well as the documents themselves. So they're a lot more thorough in what their type of things they're looking for. So SERP features themselves exist so that search engines can actually help us to find information in as quick possible, simple way. That's exactly what they want to do online, simplicity. And what they want you to do is to get an answer to your query as quick as possible. But as a result, what they do in the background is they have really sophisticated algorithms and start actually looking at what things should I present for this keyword that's been typed in this particular market. So you'll have things, for example, going left to right on this slide, you'll have things like product listing ads, maps. You'll also have things like knowledge panels. People also ask regular results, so just those 10 blue links, which we historically called. And actually, what you've also got here is things around social media. For those who are using, for instance, Twitter, Twitter will also appear on the likes of Google. And actually, they have an agreement whereby actually Google can find new URLs directly from Twitter. So, top tip number one is if you're writing a new blog post or a new piece of content, tweet it. That way, Google actually starts to pick it up and therefore it gets indexed and therefore it actually increases its likelihood to rank for that particular URL for keywords you've optimized it for. So now what we want to do is to go into the nitty gritty of what we want to talk about today, which is all around SERP features and really help you guys to try and pick more strategically SERP features to actually maximize your presence online. So to do this, what we wanted to do was to find out in the first instance, do SERP features in the United States and the United Kingdom differ by industry? The second thing we set out to achieve was, can we identify the top 10 most prominent SERP features in the US and the UK? And we also wanted to find out, do SERP features change by device as well as by keyword type? And in this case, branded and non-branded keywords. So what data did we use to do that? We analyzed over 88 trillion keywords. And we do this because we have a range of different methodologies as a technology. So, for example, one of the methodologies we have is a contributory network. And what we do is we anonymously analyze real searchers from real searchers themselves. And that really helps us to understand what types of keywords are people using right now to find information. In the background, what we're also doing is analyzing 27 SERP features themselves. So things like, for example, Google Flights. And we're also analyzing things like maps, people also ask, and so on. And we did this from January 2020 to October 2021, which is exactly what we'll be presenting to you guys today. Something very unique to us as a technology. In the background, as part of our data set, we're categorizing keywords and websites by industry. So, for example, websites like Amazon will be classified as e-commerce. Websites that actually relate to other industries, for example, theaters, will be classified as arts and entertainment. And what that allows us to do then is to really fuel our data and let you guys find out and analyze what's going on within a particular industry rather than just looking at search overall as a broad spectrum. Because as we've seen so far, our SERP features are massively complex. We have different modes of searching. And actually, thirdly, our ways in which we find information can differ enormously as well as by industry. So before we dig into the data, I just want, for anyone that's a bit new to SERP features themselves, I just want to recap a few bits of terminology we'll be using, particularly in the next 10, 15 minutes. When I say branded keyword, I basically mean a keyword that is specific to a particular company. So for example, Walt Disney World is relevant to just Walt Disney. And that really helps us to find out. Sorry, I think I've lost the slides, Heather.
I just noticed that. Christina, can we get those back? Hold on. There we go.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So, for example, when we say Disney World, that relates to Disney as a company. Therefore, that keyword is what we would call a branded term. On the flip side, we've also got things like PlayStation 5. Yes, it doesn't say Sony in it, but Sony own PlayStation. PlayStation is a business unit of that company, and therefore it would be called a branded keyword. When we talk about non-branded, we're talking about key phrases that aren't directly associated with one brand. So for example, office chair or pizza near me isn't owned by a particular pizza company or furniture company, and therefore it would be called a non-branded keyword. The industries we looked at, you can see in the middle of this slide, they span across all industries. So we're actually taking a really high level view of what's going on, but we're also drilling down into some key industries that were actually most impacted by COVID in terms of traffic. So, for example, food and drink overall pre COVID occurred offline. So, you and I would have gone to a shop to actually buy groceries, for instance. Whereas now, post COVID, there's been a significant increase in the amount of people searching online for food and beverages. And therefore, that's why I've included food, drink, groceries. And finally, when we talk of SERP features, we're talking about the individual things, in this case, that Google displays in the United States and the United Kingdom. And actually, what we're doing is pinpointing what those things are. So, for example, when someone does a search for shoes, it may appear for things like organic results, paid results. It also might appear for things like product listing ads or PLAs, as we've seen before, as well as things like videos. So it's basically the individual things that actually make up the SERP itself. So let's dig into the data. The number of SERP feature trends as a percentage in the United States and the UK is growing significantly. This slide clearly shows if you aren't looking at SERP features, you are missing out on a massive opportunity because Google in those two markets is increasing them significantly. And we've actually found this in other significant markets, for example, Canada. And what this also allows us to do is to really start thinking about and use today's webinar so that you can start to think about particular features you want to do optimization for. The number of, when we start actually looking at this and the number of keywords that are triggering SERPs, we can see it's quite significant. We're talking much, much bigger in the United States versus the UK. And the main reason for this is just pure population size. There are more people in the United States than the UK, and therefore there are more keywords triggering SERP features. But overall, what we can see from the trends is it's growing at an enormous rate, and it's growing quite significantly since the start of 2021. You're talking now millions upon millions of keywords that have SERP features triggered for them in some shape or form. Now, when we start looking at this from a non-branded perspective, we can see the United States on the left-hand side and the United Kingdom on the right. And what you're also able to see is that this is actually also increasing quite significantly. And the same goes for some branded keywords. So you're able to start actually looking at branded terms are an actual potential opportunity for us. One of my friends in the industry, Jason Bernard, really beautifully describes branded terms. And what he says is a branded keyword is your online business card. For you guys, it's really making sure that your brand is the best representation it can be. So, if, for example, you've got a keyword like Bacardi customer service or British Airways customer service, American Airlines, and so on, you want to make sure that your customer service and contact us page is optimized so that it actually appears directly on the search engine itself. That's improving the overall experience. It's your business card online. It's definitely something you want to be looking at. The number of keywords triggering SERP features is increasing on both devices. On the left-hand side, you can see this on desktop. On the right-hand side, you can see this for mobile, and you'll see on the blue line for the United States and the red line for the United Kingdom. You can see that the rate of growth is overall much more significant in the United States. Having said that, however, it's increasing on both devices. So this doesn't only, SERP features doesn't only actually impact your strategy for not just your branded and non-branded terms, it also positively impacts your strategy from a mobile versus a desktop perspective. And actually, for some industries, mobile is massive. So looking at SERP features actually helps you guys as a business and brand to actually start thinking about mobile as a strategy. In terms of the combination of SERP features, so for example, maybe you're doing a search for one keyword and it triggers things like a map and an instant answer. And then actually separately, it'll also trigger, for example, a video, a map, an image, and so on. They're what we call SERP feature combinations. They're also increasing. In other words, the results are getting really, really rich. So on the left-hand side, you'll see what that is as a raw metric. Granted, it's much less than the number of keywords that are triggering SERP features, i.e. have one SERP feature and that's it. But actually, what's happening now in recent months is that Google themselves are starting to present multiple different SERP features on one search engine results page. And you can also see this on the right hand side as a percentage. And what you'll see quite significantly is in the last few months, towards the end of last year, this has been growing at an unprecedented rate. What this also suggests indirectly is that the search engines are starting to present a lot more SERP features, not only just to improve the overall customer experience, but actually to help searchers find the information they want more quickly, which is exactly one of the core aims that they have as a business themselves. So now one of the fundamental questions. SERP features are growing, great. SERP features are growing across mobile and desktop. I can now start thinking about improving or starting a device strategy. Where do I start? One of the first things you want to focus on, particularly if you've got a website in the United States or the United Kingdom or both, these are the critical SERP features that you should be focusing on. Across all industries, these are the top 10 SERP features for each of these markets. Now, what's super interesting is the third most popular in the United Kingdom on the right hand side is images. That is also the third most popular in the United States. But having a SERP feature strategy isn't just looking at a SERP feature and optimizing it for all of your website across all of your markets. To be successful, you need to have a SERP feature strategy that actually is country specific. So in the United States, the top 4 SERP features are related questions, related searches, images, and paid. Whereas in the UK, yes, we have related searches, but we also have, for example, instant answers. It's just something that doesn't appear. Actually, in fact, it appears in the 10th position in the United States. So often brands create a strategy on one SERP feature and trying to implement it globally. That doesn't work, or does to a certain extent, because if it's in the top features, it will eventually show. But in terms of you being effective, the best way to have a SERP strategy is to analyze the most prominent SERP features within your respective market. Now, one point to note here is that when we're starting to look at things like related questions and related searches, there are actually two types of SERP features that exist to help the search engine help the searcher. So what they're doing is maybe trying to think about things like the narrowing behavior, the pearl growth, and so on, and recommend other queries directly in the SERP itself so that they, as a searcher, using their own brain, don't have to think about that process. And that's exactly what they want to do. SERP features need to be analyzed by market and regularly. They change enormously. Month to month, the SERP features themselves can differ massively. So going from a universal perspective and saying video is the big thing I want to focus on globally isn't really very effective, because video at a certain time of the year, in a certain time of the quarter, for example, may differ massively. And this data is only looking at Google. So what we want to do always is when we're looking at data, try and take a step back. Try and look at things like quarterly data. And as we'll be doing in a few months actually, is looking at more annual data of SERP features. And this will really help us to understand what way is the algorithm overall going towards. So this slide on the left-hand side, you'll see the United States and you'll see the top SERP feature trends. Now, again, what's really interesting about these two markets is that the paid search ads also correlate very, very closely with Google's revenue profits. So Google itself actually is, of course, making money from the likes of paid search. But yes, paid search has its place within the search ecosystem. But from an organic perspective, we want to be really going above and beyond that. We want to be collaborating a lot more with paid search and sharing metrics so that we can properly dominate that space. But what we also want to be doing is having a look at what are the most prominent SERP features. So again, another top tip that you guys can do is at its very least, map out who your 5 largest competitors are. Use that information to go to the likes of, for example, SimilarWeb and find out what are the most prominent SERP features that those competitors are ranking for. That's your start of your journey of trying to find what are the most dominant SERP features. Of course, if you're not a customer of the likes of SimilarWeb, also just go and find that information out from another tool. We want you to do well. But one thing that we have really uniquely to us is keywords by industry. So you can actually go and find out how an actual industry, and in fact, you can even create a custom industry. So, for example, rather than looking at beverages, you can actually customize it and have it looking at coffee as an actual type of beverage, for instance. And that helps you to better understand how do I win within that particular market that matters to me. SERP features by quarter. Overall, for the most part, SERP features are growing quite significantly. In the United Kingdom, the growth of instant answers is decreasing quite a lot, Q over Q. So we did this for quarter 2 and quarter 3 of last year. That doesn't mean to say that we should stop optimizing for instant answers. It just means that there may be a part of the algorithm that's reducing or has the potential to reduce this SERP feature. And therefore, what we want to do is to be mindful of these changes. This data also shows that SERP feature strategies need to change throughout the year for you to be successful. You don't want to just say, I want to own the space for instant answers, videos, and Google Maps because I have shops in real life offline. It's making sure that we're actually starting to think about what SERP features do I want to optimize at which parts of the year, and crucially to monitor and analyze data to direct those decisions. That's what really successful campaigns do for SERP features. So one of the crucial questions is, how do SERP features stack up by industry? So in the United States, there's 3 core prominent industries that have been most impacted by COVID that have a lot of SERP features, and they are news and media, e-commerce, and e-commerce marketplace. There's 3 quite significant pillars here you can see on the left-hand side that have a lot of SERP features associated with them. On the right-hand side, you can see this for the United Kingdom, and you can see it's actually a little bit more evenly distributed. So there's 4 core pillars followed by 2 close seconds. So it's actually quite broad across all of the different industries that we have. And this also goes to show that, yes, it's good to a certain extent to have a focus on a SERP feature, but it's really important to know what's going on within your industry. Analyzing your close competitors is a way for you to start analyzing an industry, but really starting to take a step back and looking at industry data is critical for driving your SERP feature performance. What you can also see is that some SERP features are much more prominent than others. So, for example, if you wanted to focus on video in the United States, the key industries to have are law and government, news and media, followed then by e-commerce and marketplace, and a little bit of travel and tourism. This really helps us to direct what should we be focusing on. Whereas in the United Kingdom, we can see that video isn't really a massive SERP feature. It certainly doesn't come into the top 5. So crucially for us, we want to be starting to think about more of instant answers wherever possible. We want to be looking a little bit more about paid search. In fact, paid search is more popular in the UK in terms of the number of keywords as a percentage that paid search appears in versus the United States. Quite surprising. Doesn't always mean because there's a population there that paid search is going to be the most successful lever to have as part of your digital marketing strategy. Actually, make sure that we're analyzing which keywords and which volume of keywords are triggering a SERP feature of which paid search account and take up an actual feature themselves. But in this case, paid search is literally just referring to the usual bog standard paid search ads at the top. It's not looking at things like product listing ads, shopping feeds, and so on. Really get in deeper helps you guys to succeed online. So let's take a step back for anyone that's working in any of these industries that have been most impacted by COVID on today's call. Here's the SERP features you should be focusing on at least or start to research from today. So if, for example, you can see and you do paid search, do it, keep doing it. It's a really good, important part of your digital marketing strategy. You can see here that overall it appears in all of these industries. When you start looking at, for example, product listing ads, you'll see that they're most prominent in other industries. So, for example, groceries, e-commerce and shopping, but actually the most prominent product listing ad is fashion. Really, really critical, because if you're then therefore working in fashion, PLA should be a big part of your paid search strategy, because the search engine, in this case Google US, displays and shows a lot of them, which then actually means that more people see them and are likely to interact with your website and brand as a result. If you want to optimize, for example, for things like video, you'll see the top particular industry for that is 8%, and that is for groceries, followed then by 7, which are for things like sports, e-commerce, and so on. So really, really use this, particularly when you play it back, hit pause. Feel free as well just to look at this and see what SERP feature is the most prominent as a percentage, which is a really nice way to look at things by industry. And that will really help you guys to succeed online. For the United Kingdom, for the most part, there's not any big major differences. So for instance, paid search appears in all of the key industries. Product listing ads also appears in things like fashion the most, but also a very close second is things like groceries. And some things actually appear to a much lesser extent than other industries. You'll also see that again, related questions and related searches are quite significant across the board. And therefore, you want to make sure that you're actually aware of what the status of those things are. Don't forget, SERP features influence where results occur. So if, for example, Google were, they're not doing this now, if Google were to have at the top of the SERP related questions followed by related searches, the top results, including paid and organic, will be pushed way down. And actually monitoring this information is critical for your businesses. But you can also see there's quite significant differences, sometimes subtle across core industries, but sometimes massively significant when we're starting to compare the same SERP feature across different markets. So having that multi-market strategy is critical. So before we go into some top tips, I just want to point out a bit more information about SimilarWeb. Again, there's two core ways which you can find SERP features. The first is you can specify a keyword or a collection of keywords, which we call a keyword list, and you can find the most prominent dominant SERP features for those keywords, which you can see on this screen grab on the left-hand side. We also have a metric, for example, called zero click, that actually takes into account that SERP behavior that we had at the start. So things like pearl growing, thrashing, exit, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, you've also got a domain-specific ability where you can go and find out what SERP features are my competitors focusing on at an individual keyword level. One thing you guys should definitely do today, if you're a SimilarWeb customer or not, is download the SERP feature report. It's actually currently been updated for last year's data. We are going to refresh it in May of this year with a lot more industry-specific information. The reason why I'm saying this is because it's free. You're not committed to do anything, but you're getting this information by industry, by SERP feature. I want you guys to do well, and therefore look at this data to help you do that. If you want to find out more about what SimilarWeb does, feel free to click on the book demo orange button on the right hand side, and that will then actually direct you through to one of the people on our sales team. So let's jump back straight in and have a look at some of the best practices when it comes to optimizing SERP features. So one of the ones is around related questions, and related questions is ultimately there so that the search engine can help suggest relevant keywords so that the searcher can find a relevant result for it. Now, also in the background, related questions are starting to look at things like the quality of content. You want to make sure any content you're producing and publishing from here on in is not duplicated, and not just not duplicated from your own website, but also from that elsewhere in the web. Don't be creating content because someone else creates it. That's not a really good content strategy. Equally so, it's not good for related questions. What you want to do is to go and analyze what content is very, very different. The second thing you want to be looking at is search engine specific data. You want to be using and looking at what keywords are being triggered on Amazon, YouTube, Google, Bing, Yahoo, Yandex, and so on, and really have a better understanding of an actual search engine and what that search engine itself is doing. Thirdly, you want to be looking at things like featured snippets. So optimize your contents with instant answers in mind. So if you're writing a blog post of how to set up a laptop, make sure in the first paragraph we're addressing that keyword. To set up a laptop, you need to do literally address it, literally attack it very, very early on. Search engines equally like this because you're getting into the nitty gritty and you're also being really helpful from a content perspective. And finally, for related questions, you want to create content hubs. Not just doing keyword research and just looking at random keywords. What keywords and what topic of keywords, more importantly, do you want to own? So, for example, if you are in the coffee market, do you want to own coffee capsules? Therefore, you should start to be looking at more coffee capsule keywords. You want to start thinking about close associations with that term, and that helps you to build out an actual hub. Because as and when you start adding more content that's directly relevant to that particular topic, that helps you to create and be a content hub. Instant answers. You want to make sure again you're having unique content. There's no thing, for example, like thin content on your website. So that's where you've got a page, you maybe got a paragraph or two, and actually it's not really there to do anything or be helpful. It's just there purely on the basis that, for example, a web developer has published that particular URL. We want to ask ourselves basic questions. What is this page for? If I viewed this page and didn't work for the company that I work for, would I find it useful? And also, finally, is this particular piece of content unique? If you can answer yes to all those questions, you've got really unique, good quality content. You want to also be thinking about semantics. So, which keywords can I also write in my content that indirectly relate to one another? So, for example, sneakers and running shoes, for the most part, mean the same thing. Therefore, when we're writing content and if we work for a sports brand, we would want to start using keywords interchangeably because search engines also pick up on this correlation and identify how do these paragraphs all link to each other and what types of phrases and stuff are they using. Quality content. Again, as I said on the previous slide, if you're asking a question about a particular blog post, let's answer the question ideally in the first line of the first paragraph. Be explicit. Really, really start to think about that. But in terms of really starting to connect this with things like personas, also have a think about things like, should we start to identify authorships within the company? Do we have and do we want to create a little network of experts? So, for example, in health, which is all relating to your money, your health, or your life, sorry, maybe you want to have different types of experts. Maybe you want to treat mental health as an umbrella. Second to that, you want to maybe even create, for example, physical health and then break each of those down into different types of subcategories. But each of those subcategories is associated with an entity, an author, that actually helps to build your authority and the quality of your content online. And fourthly, for this particular SERP feature, you want to make sure that we're focused and really, really specializing in things that we can win on, but not forgetting things like the brilliant basics, like internal links. So if we've got a really successful piece of content that's generating consistently a lot of visits from our analytics that we have, let's internally link to and from each of those pages. For videos, again, the brilliant basics of titles and descriptions, but also think about the searcher. Think about the search engine as a result. Does this title and does this description align with what the video itself is? Think about things like thumbnails. So is this actually a good thumbnail to have? That's the little picture that's there before the preview or actually the video starts. Again, think about the searcher, web accessibility. If people are blind or are visually impaired, they need to read information, for example, through a screen reader. Video transcript really helps with this, but it actually also helps search engines to properly understand what that video content is. But equally so, we're starting to be a much more user-centric strategy. And fourthly, in this piece, it's page mapping. Make sure we're pairing one video to one page. When you start having a landing page with multiple videos, search engines can be really confused as to which video or videos should they index, and actually then they start deprioritizing videos. That's not what you want to have when you want to have a video strategy. Local 3-pack, if you've got physical stores elsewhere offline, you want to make sure that your stores are registered to Google My Business or Bing Places. And that's just really making sure that the search engines themselves explicitly know you have stores, what's the address of them, what's the contact information, and so on. And that really, really helps you guys to show them where those stores are located, and therefore they're able to rank them in and for certain queries within that particular location. Where do you start if you've got multiple stores? For example, if you're working for a brand like Nike or Adidas, look at your analytics, find out which stores are currently generating traffic online and actually prioritize those stores. Long-term strategy is to look at actual stores that currently are generating very little or no web traffic, and that can then actually help you inform your longer term strategy. The biggest thing that matters when it comes to local 3-pack is links and reviews. So promote your business online. Have things like stickers, like review, ask customers to review, particularly if they've had a really good experience. It really helps engagement with brands. Search engines also look at this really high level information too. Also do things like what's called advanced on-page SEO. So not just looking at things like semantic keywords, but also use things like local language. What's the slang version of that street or road called, for example? What sort of, in, for instance, London, what are the closest tube stations? That actually is an indirect way that you can signal to a search engine where the store is located, which helps them further get a signal as to where to rank your particular website. Apps. Apps have certain criteria that need to be met. Your app needs to be approved. So if you create an app today and you launch it, make sure that we're actually getting that approved. Have a unique keyword strategy. Looking at things like auto suggest or auto completion in the App Store can be a really useful way for you to start doing app keyword research. Have a title, have a description that matches that app. So it's really about relevancy and value. And like Local 3-pack, gain reviews to your app. Paid search. So again, there's quite complex. You've got product listing ads, shopping feeds, and so on. Paid search is quite complex itself, but making sure that we're optimizing for keywords that are relevant to the search and to your website. Use things like, for example, extensions to make sure that you're taking up more market share within the SERP marketplace. Test all the time. Do A/B testing to find out what works best for you and your audience in your market from a paid search perspective. And finally, for paid search, use call to actions in your ads to drive things. So, for example, whether it's really being explicit and looking at competitors' call to actions to get you started, or really starting to think about things like offering things like free delivery and those types of things. So, to summarize it up so far, we have many different SERP behaviors, and actually, as a result, we have many different SERP features that exist. And one of the core reasons for that is for us to find quality information as quickly and simply as possible. And whilst on the surface, the US and the UK are quite similar, they're both, for the most part, English language countries. Both are growing quite significantly, but they're massively different from a search perspective. International brands or any brand who operates in more than one market needs to have a SERP feature strategy by market to really succeed online. And finally, we need to identify the top opportunities by SERP feature, but also making sure we're using the right optimization tactics also by SERP feature. Thank you so much for everyone's time. I'm now going back to Heather for any Q&A.
Hey, Gerald, that was a lot of really good information. We got a lot of questions, so we got 15 minutes. Let's try to get to as many as we can. All right. So first question that we have comes from from Isaac. So this is going back kind of to the beginning, and he asks, so is it better to use Twitter than any other social? And that would be for the US market or for the English language.
So from an indexation perspective, Twitter's really good to get new content fed into Google. In terms of indexation, it's a really good tactic to use. Having said that, in terms of just plain content promotion, it's also good to use other social media. So the more people you can get eyeballs to the content, the more people are likely to create a backlink to it, share it with a friend, and therefore really going back to that, one of the first things he said is around like search is very broad in the modes of searching. And therefore actually people can more recommend your brand. And actually this can indirectly start to impact things like direct search. So searching, for example, on a domain.
Okay, perfect. So Patricia is asking, do you know if SERP features differ significantly between the US and Canada?
Yes, they do massively. There's no two countries that have very, very similar similarities around SERP features themselves. So yes, they do. They do differ enormously. And actually, for Canada, it's a little bit more complex because you've got multiple languages or more official languages involved. So brands that are in one market actually need to start thinking of multi-market, and in that case, having an English and a French version of the website. But equally so, it may be that the same keyword in English and in French triggers very different SERP features. So within Canada as its own market, it also needs to have very different SERP strategies for you to succeed online.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So Costas is asking, is there a big difference between news and article schema? What should a news website use to show up in SERP news?
Yeah. So news is an interesting one because you've got things like AMP, and AMP for the most part seems to be in the decline phase. And for anyone that's new to it, is called accelerated mobile pages. And essentially, it's a very simplified version of a page to be more mobile friendly that is directly relevant to news. But search engines have this thing called QDF, which stands for Query Deserves Freshness. And essentially, what that means is any keyword potentially, depending on what the news itself is showing, has the ability to show us a news article. So, for example, the word storm, for the most part, doesn't really trigger a lot of news. However, when there is a storm in a particular city in the world, that would then be a lot more newsworthy. So, some keywords just start to generate news. So, having news as a SERP feature strategy is very short term, it's very in the real moment. So actually starting to look at news overall, unless you're in the news and media space or industry, it certainly shouldn't really be a core strategy of yours to succeed online.
Makes sense. So another question is, how often is the similar web algorithm updated?
It's actually updated on a daily basis. So one of the features we have is a thing called a weekly filter. And what you're able to see is which keywords are actually driving traffic to any website in the last 48 hours. So, for example, in some domains, you'll see there's a lot of topical things in the news. For example, Russia and Ukraine. You'll actually start to see when you punch in and things like CNN and New York Times, you'll actually see that some of the top keywords that are setting traffic to those websites are those keywords. And that really helps you guys to stay on top of things.
Alex is asking, with rumors of Google possibly taking actions for privacy like the iPhone did when it comes to gathering certain useful information from users, how do you think it will impact searches in the future? And what is the best way to combat new privacy features to still maintain efficient targeting?
Really good. This is actually more from a non-organic perspective. So things like around like display ads. What overall is happening is back in the day, about 2004, Google became what was called encrypted, where they then just started to hide which keywords were sending traffic to websites. Um, and what's actually happening now is we're moving more from individual keywords to person to groups. So we're actually becoming more cohorts. And that actually, for you guys that do performance marketing, not just having personas and user profiles, but actually what groups of people do we get into your website, and really think about that from a pure above the line marketing perspective. What are their genders? What are their interests? What types of behaviors are they likely to exhibit? And that actually helps you guys to feed into what types of content should you produce to satisfy those particular cohorts of people. So overall, it's going to have actually no impact on how we search. All major search engines have now got secure searches, so when you go to them, it's not like shared publicly elsewhere on the web. Um, but for brands to succeed, they're starting to hide a little bit more information as a result of not publishing that information. But what it also does is draws us back, which is no bad thing, to how marketing started. Who are the consumers? What are they looking for? And therefore, what do we as a brand need to do to engage with that consumer or group of consumers?
I love it. I love the direction marketing is going. Let's just keep it going, you know.
Exactly.
So let's see. Smitha is asking how to target keywords with high search volume, but also have a high difficulty score.
Oh, it's an interesting one. Usually, keywords that have a high search volume actually doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to gain or potentially gain you traffic to your website. So, for example, um, keywords like laptops are probably going to have a lot of zero clicks because people haven't really thought about what are they going to do after they do a search with that keyword. That would have what we would call a lot of zero clicks. So keyword difficulty and search volume are two really good useful metrics to start the keyword selection process. But the other things you need to be looking at are things like keyword intent. So what is this, an informational query? Is it someone just looking for a piece of information? Or actually critically, is it things like a conversion type of keyword? Is it a purchase keyword? So one thing I would definitely advise is to look into a concept called the buyer's journey, which helps you to really start thinking about the psychology behind keywords and actually starting to map them out in minimum 3 stages: awareness, consideration, and decision. And that will really help you to pick much better keywords outside of just looking at search volume and keyword difficulty. The problem with keyword difficulty overall is it's just looking at backlink information. Backlinks are one part of the ranking algorithm. They're one part of the calculation. It's almost like having an equation that has 4 parts. You're only looking at one part of it. It's not going to guarantee you to get the sum at the very end. Therefore, having a blended approach is a much more effective way of looking at things. For example, SERP features.
Great. So, good question from Kate. She says, "Hi, Gerald. When optimizing an e commerce site for related questions, featured snippets, or related searches, which pages would you focus on optimizing? Should they be looking at product or category pages, blog posts?"
Both. First thing I would do is, for whichever term that is, have a look right now on the fly, particularly using a incognito or private browser where possible, and have a look at what the search engine of your choice is ranking quite well now. So, for example, if you're doing something, for instance, like running shoes, just using a quick glance down and have a look, are they overall ranking category pages? If so, I, in that particular market, would be more focused on optimizing my category page because the search engine in that particular market is preferring or ranking a lot more category pages than, for example, product pages. It does take a little bit more digging into the data because you have to know how things like URL structure. So, for example, /p/ could mean a product page in one website, whereas in others it may explicitly just say product, or it may not say it at all. It may use, for example, dashes. So really understanding all of those different patterns online can help you achieve that.
Awesome. So, George asks, he says, when my content writers are looking for reference articles, I often search for articles that are ranking well with a weak backlink profile. My thought is the content is ranking on quality. What do you think of this strategy?
Yeah, so definitely always review backlinks. So you've got some of the big players, for example, you've got Majestic in there who just do backlinks. Have a look and see what types of numbers are they producing. So they have a thing called trust and citation flow. There are many, of course, other ones out there that can help you on that. And what that actually helps you to do on the surface is to find out the quality of links or the lack of quality. If they have very poor quality, deprioritize them. You don't want to become associated with websites that have low quality backlink profile, because that actually dilutes your own authority online. You really want to be engaging with two types of other partners. One is those who have similar content to you. And by similar, I don't mean in terms of word for word, what's is like and like, but similar in the sense of what topics do they write about? Would your audience find that relevant? And the second is, what is their backlink profile? So have a look at those two core metrics, and that should keep you, for the most part, on the right track.
Awesome. I think we've got time. We'll try to take one or two more. This is a good one. Oh, I just lost it because that's the way that it goes sometimes.
It's all right.
Okay. Manish asks, and I just want to give this real quick because Manish, I thought about this. So I saw the banter between Manish and George going back and forth and answering each other's questions. So I love
I love
seeing
it.
that. It's fantastic. So thank you all for those who are answering questions, as we're given the presentation. But he asks how to analyze SERP features in a competitive market like the US. They saw a lot of new SERP features in a busy holiday month. How should advertisers be ready for new things?
Very, very good question. And actually, I think this goes back to a point of not just having that little list of SERP features and that is your strategy. One thing actually I didn't mention throughout the webinar is that when we analyzed this data, we saw that when lockdowns occurred in both the United States and the UK, Google itself displayed very few maps virtually instantly. And what that suggests is that SERP features themselves are very much in real time. Everything to a certain extent is very fresh. So, in answer to your question, what you want to be doing is looking at a range of different SERP features. And as the old saying goes, never put all your eggs in one basket, because something can happen quite drastically, positively or negatively, to that SERP feature. But that shouldn't always direct what way your business succeeds online.
Great. I think let's take one more. Okay. So another question from Kate. She said, how would you utilize structured data when optimizing for search features?
So structured data, I think, is good in principle in the sense of it's in essence data about data. So it's helping search engines to have a much clearer understanding of what this page and therefore website is about. When structured data tends to be used a lot more is actually in the e-commerce space. So there's a lot more elements, as they're called, unstructured data. So you've got things like the price of a product, how many you have in stock, is it on promotion? And that really helps search engines to start thinking a little bit more in real time about your products, but also to enhance their understanding outside of what the content itself says on the website itself. So definitely incorporating structured data. Where and when every brand should do it across all industries is for multimedia. So if you want to succeed, for example, for things like videos, structured data is also beneficial for search engines to better understand what that video is about, how long is it, when was it created. All of those good things are really, really good structured elements to include.
Perfect. All right, one more. This will be the last one, I promise. But
No,
Hannah's
keep coming.
face when she asked this question, she says, "Where do I find keyword difficulty?" With, a couple exclamation points. Just she's really curious.
Yeah. So actually, keyword difficulty exists in many tools that are out there. Some tools have had it for years. Hopefully, I don't get a slap on the wrist for saying this. SimilarWeb is actually going to release keyword difficulty in the next few months. So we're going to have it as a technology, which will be looking at a range of different features. But you should find it out there in the main players who just help with SEO. So just Google, for example, SEO tools, and you'll find it in, for example, things like Moz, and those types of tools will have keyword difficulty.
Awesome. Awesome. With that, we are just about at the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. Again, the amount of questions and interactivity on the chat, we love seeing that. So aside from that, we had some great questions. There are some that didn't get answered. So Gerald, we'll send those over to you and your team for after this. But before we kick us out of here, why don't you tell us where, or tell the people where can they find you and SimilarWeb?
Indeed. So get us on Twitter at SimilarWeb. Get us on LinkedIn. The same. Even me personally, if you want to connect, more than happy to do so. But yeah, find us all over all social media on Facebook, LinkedIn, even Instagram, as we're now on, all at SimilarWeb.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody who joined us. Don't forget there's a survey afterwards. Gerald, thank you so much for being here with
Thank you,
us.
Heather.
And we will see you all next time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
All the best, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.